Hello people, welcome to Gurukula. I'm Jai. So today in this video we will be talking about Cross-Site Request Forgery, which is abbreviated as CSRF and sometimes pronounced as CSRF. So without wasting much of your time, let's get into the topic. So if you have directly landed onto this particular video, I would like to let you know that this is a series of video lectures where we are discussing the web application penetration testing and various vulnerabilities present in the web application. So previously in our video we spoke a lot about how to establish reverse shell connection by using command injection vulnerability with the help of DVWA web application. So I will leave you the link for the complete playlist in the description box below, and I would recommend you to check that out. In this video we are planning to understand what exactly session management is, because it is a prerequisite to understand what CSRF is, but only if you understand how the sessions are managed in a web application for a logged in user we can able to perform an exploit for CSRF. And then we will actually see the session management in action by capturing some packets that is exchanged between DVWA web application and then our client. And then we will progress and understand what CSRF is and how does an attacker actually performs an CSRF attack, and we will show you a live demo, and we will conclude this particular video with a discussion on defensive techniques. So what exactly is session management? So session management is a kind of technique which is implemented by every web application to authenticate the user after he has logged into that particular web application. So let us assume that we have an user called Jai and he has an account in some particular web application. Let us say this is a banking web application. So the first things first, the user will actually ask for a login page as soon as he opens up the web browser. So here is the web browser. As soon as he logs up the web browser, he will load the login page. Usually the login page comes with two fields, so where the user is expected to enter the user ID and then the password, and then finally by clicking on this login button the request whatever that you have entered it will be submitted. So as a second step, so when I assume this as first and this will be the second step, in the second step the user is expected to type in all the data. So let us take that the user ID is Jai and the password is test, and then as soon as he clicks on the login button, all these details, which means this user ID and then this password, will be sent to the web application server, and this web application server will verify whether the entered user ID and then the password is correct against the database which is already present with the web application. And if the user is found to be valid, then the web application will actually send an session ID, which is SID. Let us assume that the session ID which is generated for this particular user, for Jai, the session ID is ABC123, and this piece of information will be sent back to the browser, and this particular browser is going to save this piece of information in the browser itself, and that is what we call it as cookie. And from now on the browser is going to include this cookie in every subsequent request. So if there is a request to the web application with the session ID ABC123, and then let us assume that this is for password reset request. If the request is for password reset and it contains the session ID ABC, and if this request is reaching the web application, this web application will first check that the session ID, and then this session ID will be verified with the existing database, and here also we have the same session ID. If the session ID matches, then the web application will assume that this particular request is actually coming from Jai. So no matter who sends this request, as long as this session ID matches with their request, the web application is going to assume that this request is from the authenticated user called Jai, and whatever the action he wanted to perform, the server will allow him to do that. So that is how the server will validate a particular session and allow the user to perform the requested action. We will see how the session is actually managed with our DVW application and ZAP to intercept the packet. So here we have our application. What I will do is I will start our intercepting. I will set the ZAP as a proxy. Now I will type the username as admin, and we know the password is password, and when I click on hit enter, you can actually see that there are two requests which has been sent. So one is the post request which is sent to the web server, which actually contains the username and then the password. Once we have logged in, if you look at the HTTP request which has been exchanged between the client and then the server, we can actually see that the first request is actually the post method. HTTP request which is sent is a post method, and that post method contains the username and then the password and then the action word login, and actually it contains the user token so that it verifies the request is from the authenticated client. And then now actually this is the request which has been sent, and now we can see what is the response that we have received. So if you look at the response, actually the browser has responded with 302, it is not found, but the PHP session has been set to 801. So 80AJ something. So it is actually setting a cookie, something like this. And then when we look at the next get command, we can actually see, so in the next get command, we are actually asking for the index.php. This is the actual request which has been sent. And then for this particular request, when we look at the response, you can actually see that the response is actually 200 OK, which means it has been approved, and then it is actually displaying the content. So when you look at the first response, if you look at the first response, it is actually setting the cookie here. As we were discussing in the theory, we could actually able to see that the cookie is actually set to some value. So this is the value which has been set as the cookie value. So as long as this particular cookie value is present, then the DVW application is going to authenticate any request that is being sent from the admin. So that is what this particular exchange says. And in the next request, if you see, then we can see that the cookie is actually set to this particular value. And if I keep on navigating the website, when I click on brute force, the page has been loaded. And when you look at what is the request that is sent, the request is sent here it actually shows this is the page which I wanted to load. So vulnerabilities/brute. So this is the request that has been sent here. Along with this particular request, the cookie is also been sent. So as you can see that the session ID is mentioned in every request which I am sending. And even if I click on some other link, and when I capture that particular link, you can see that the session ID has been mentioned over here. So as long as this particular session ID matches any request, the web application is going to authenticate that request and he will be allowed to log in. So now we will see where this particular session ID will be saved in our browser. So when you come to the browser and then when you hit on F12, it is going to open up the development tools. In the storage menu, when you just click on this cookies and then when you land on this 127.0.0.1, so that is where we have, and actually you can see that there is so now you can clearly see that this particular session ID is saved as a cookie over here, and the security level is set to impossible, and then the security level is actually set to impossible here. So what we can see is we can just check whether if the user is authenticated only based on this particular session ID. So what we can do is we can just try to change the security level to low, and then I will click on any particular link. So if I just check on that, you can see that this is the request which has been sent, and that is the response. So here is the response, and for the last character, this is an successful message, and also request which has been sent here is this is the request which has been sent. So now what we can do is we can just make use of this session ID, and then we will try to log in as admin from a different browser. We will try to do that. I will just copy this and then I will open up, before that I will just stop the proxy so that the traffic will not be captured. I will open up a new private window. So this is a new private browsing window, and when I try to log into this particular web application, it is not going to allow me. See, it is asking for an username and then the password. But when I send a request along with the session ID, so let me just enter into the development tools over here, and then what I will do is, instead of this particular session ID, I will paste the session ID which has been copied from the previous one, and now I have pasted the session ID. So this session ID is as same as the previous session what it has been given. I will have to check whether the cookie has been refreshed or not, because if the cookies are not refreshed, okay, now the cookies are refreshed. There is no change in the session ID, but instead of security we will have to just type it as low, because in high security level it is not going to work. So I can just change it to low security level, and now I will try to land on the same page. So I will try to land on the same page called Vulnerabilities and /brute. So when I hit enter, you can actually see that even when I am in the private window, I have not logged in on this particular browser. I have logged in only on this browser, but still the web application has authenticated this particular request because the session ID is actually matching with the, so here is the session ID. This particular session ID is actually matching with this particular session ID. So your web application is going to authenticate this particular request wherever the request is coming from, if it is not properly secured, and if the session ID is the only authentication factor, then that is very vulnerable. So we can actually able to take on the session, and this comes under something like session hijacking or cookie stealing, which we will be discussing in the later part of the series. So as of now, I just wanted all my viewers to understand that the web application will authenticate the request based on the session ID, and this is how the session will be managed. And admin, this particular session ID is valid for admin as long as he is logged into this particular session, and once you have logged out, for the next login attempt, new session ID will be given. So that is how the session will be managed, and I hope now you understood how the session is actually managed. So with this understanding, I think it's good to move on and understand how actually the CSRF is executed.